Hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 310 of the Assorted Calibers podcast, the second podcast as a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd, and with me tonight, she is the greatest hostess the world has ever seen. She is amazing, and let's be honest, this show would suck without her. Erin Paulette. How you doing, Erin?
I persist.
You persist.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Each time I ask you not to sing my praises on the show, you go, okay, and then double down and kiss my ass even harder. I just want the listeners to know I don't ask for that. He just does that.
Isn't it awesome? I will have you know that there was one point in my college career where I turned to it was actually one of Nate Spencer's roommate who does our music, and turned to one of Nate's roommates and says, "Please don't call me Weer'd." You see how well that worked. So
yeah, I'm hanging in there. You know, Weer'd, the last time we had a podcast, it was titled "Maybe Weer'd Should Stop Leaving Town," and then you left town for an entire week. Mm-hmm. What's up with that?
Well, I went to the camp in Vermont that the family goes to every year, and I will also let you know and let the listeners know that this is officially the end of summer for the Weer'd family, and so we are here for the foreseeable future. There's not another trip planned. And hopefully no more family emergencies or anything like that. But yeah, no, went to the camp in up in Vermont. Got to hang out with Wes Fenza of the Mind Killer podcast. He and his daughter were walking down to the lake to take a swim and walked past me, and I get my I'm an NRA life member. I've mentioned that before. So I get Shooting Illustrated every month, and I generally don't read them when I'm at home. Ever so often, if I see something interesting on the cover, I might read one article just to see what's going on and all that. But most of the time, everything in it is stuff that I have already seen or heard before online, because I mean that was the old statement about bloggers, is the legacy media is all the stuff that the blogs were talking about 3 days ago. So I don't, but again, I've got my nephew's there, and he's a gun nut, but he is not an NRA member. And so what I do is I go there, and when I have, and then sit in my chair by the lake and read my NRA magazines, just blast through them pretty fast, because, you can skim some articles. There's some stuff that I don't care about. And then I hand them off to him, and he can take them home and read them at his leisure. But Wes comes walking by and sees me sitting in my chair by the lake with just a stack of gun magazines on my chest. And he's going, if only I could send this I had my phone and I could take a picture and send this to David. This is what Weer'd looks like. And then of course that is the David on the Mind Killer, not our David.
Okay.
But yes, back from Vermont, had a very good time, and, have been doing like so much laundry. Oh my God. My daughter, when given an opportunity to swim, she swims. And sometimes the opportunity to swim does not come with the opportunity to change into a bathing suit. And so sometimes she would just come back to the tent in all her clothes and just head to toe soaked. And she said she attempted to dry them out. I don't think she did a really good job, because when we loaded her hamper into the car, it was fragrant. And so
how old is she again?
She's 10.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we had stinky lake water clothes in the car. Like, that was nice for some of the stopovers that we did on the way down, and come back in. The car's been sitting in the sun. You open up the door and it's like, oh, goodness gracious. let's roll down the windows until the AC kicks on.
The car has been brining in the sun.
I mean, it has. I mean, it's not as bad as my first Ranger. My wife always likes to talk about how if I ever parked my 91 Ford Ranger with cloth seats in the sun and you opened up the door, the whole thing just smelled like farts. It did not matter what the situation was. There was enough farts baked into that seat that a little bit of sunlight will bring them out.
Of course it smells like farts. Why is everything about you butt related? That's what I want to know.
I'm just saying that I take Vermont. I am an artist. Vermont food is my paint, and the world around me is my canvas.
Oh dear.
All right, let's quickly get away from this subject matter.
I mean, I'd like to, but I think it's clinging to me.
That does happen.
That's the thing about smells. When you can smell them, the particles are actually in your nose.
My nephew was in the next tent over, and he and his significant other were laying there in bed, and they heard a righteous fart. And then, it was said, "Did you just fart?" "No." "Oh my God, that's your uncle's fart." It was a trans tent fart. All right, we're leaving. We're leaving the subject matter. All right. First up, I'm going to start off with I guess it's a correction is the best thing. Old Windways, who is actually the person that actually informed me that Wes was the host of the Mind Killer podcast. I had no idea he did any podcasting. I'd known him for years and years, and it never came up that I did podcasts when we were talking, and it never came, either way. And then he went, "Yeah, there's only going to be so many camps in Vermont that are there, and the fact that you both talked about how we got shut down early because of a positive COVID diagnosis, and that's a blast in the past. It's a different world." But yeah, that was his idea. But he sent me a link to the what is it? Yeah, the Mass Department of Public Safety, and it's talking about the Massachusetts non-resident LTC, because Aaron, you were saying that, it's, a yearly LTC renewal. And I says, I think they fixed it. I think it goes 6 years like the resident permits are. And
well, I mean, at the time when we were discussing the case,
mm-hmm.
The case that we were discussing at the time of the arrest, they were saying that it only lasted for a year. It probably changed, and so it sounds like you're saying it has.
It is not. I see why I got confused, and it's not true. So the Massachusetts non-resident LTC still is only valid for 1 year and needs to be renewed every year. The big difference is, and one of the more onerous parts of it is that for you to get your non-resident LTC, you need to show up at the Department of Public Safety building in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is not the greatest part of Metro Boston, I will say, as someone who used to work on the Boston-Chelsea border. Like literally, one of my coworkers said, if you go out for a walk and wander around a little bit, don't wander too far in that direction. And so you have to show up in person to actually apply for your permit. They will not take it through the mail. And then what they have changed is every 6 years you have to reappear in person to renew your permit. But before that time, you can renew online, but you're still paying $100 and filling out the renewal form every year, which, I mean, oh my God, like you've got to be like constantly just filling out the paperwork, because it takes like at least 3 months for them to renew. Every time I've done it, I'm actually up for a renewal at the end of the year, so I'm gonna have to do that. Usually I start right around Thanksgiving. I use that as my as my remember to renew your firearms license, and it takes months for it to come through. So like you've got like a couple of months of grace period, and then it's time to start filling out paperwork again. I mean, the process is the punishment, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the correction. The Aaron, you were still correct. My statement that I think they've changed it. They did change it so that you don't have to drive into Chelsea every single year to renew your permit, but you do still need to renew every year, and you just need to come in every 6 years to renew it.
Okay.
All right. So this next one was a case that you were like, I don't know if this quite fits in with the show. And I said, you know what? It sounds pretty good. But I did tell you that I did a little bit of looking at the case, and my understanding of this case is a little shaky. So I politely asked you to take the lead on this one.
Okay. So we are talking about the case of United States versus Smith in the Fifth Circuit, which held that geofence warrants are unconstitutional. And this is a good thing.
This is a good thing.
People who work in law enforcement will disagree because it does make their job harder. But I'm going to explain why this is a good thing. So Weer'd wanted me to explain what geofencing is. And I'm going to explain it to the best of my knowledge. I'm obviously not a technical expert, and I will most likely get some things wrong, but I think I can explain it that most lay people will understand. Okay, so a geofence is something that's kind of arbitrarily defined. You know, it is a fence, a perimeter around a particular area. That's the geo. You've actually seen this done if you watch police procedural shows. Whenever you hear, the cops talking about they got a warrant to track somebody's, cell phone data and ping them off towers and things like that. That's geofencing. Sort of. And you are getting how their phone, interacts with which towers, and so you have an idea of where they are according to GPS. Now, that's fine because that is a specific warrant that is based on probable cause and is targeting, a specific number of named people, and those are good warrants. The problem with geofencing in general is that it is used to basically go, okay, who is in this area at this particular time? Whose cell phones wandered into this particular geofence? And that is ruled unconstitutional because that has been decided that it is a general warrant, and a general warrant has been unconstitutional since like the 1700s in this country. So now you're going to ask, what's a general warrant? And the definition of a general warrant is a warrant that gives law enforcement very broad authority to search and seize unspecified places or persons. I realize that doesn't say a whole lot, so let's give you an example. A good search warrant would say, okay, you are authorized to search this particular house at this particular address because you're looking for X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that search warrant is for the entire house. Sometimes it's only for, the interior as opposed to, digging up the yard. This is how warrants are supposed to work, because you have to be able to articulate, this is what we think the suspect has done wrong. This is why we think this evidence is here. We want permission to go look. A general warrant would be, so we think something criminal is going on in this neighborhood, so your warrant means that you can search any house in the neighborhood looking for anything illegal. And that has been deemed unconstitutional. And the application here is that geofencing for everyone who's tripping the perimeter of the geofence, that's a general warrant, because you don't suspect everyone who walks into this area. But that's exactly what this tracking is doing. It's, all of these people were in this particular area at this particular time as, in the same rough area and the same time as this one criminal that we're tracking. It's entirely possible that one or more of these people might be engaged in criminal activity with this person. So, based upon a very loose association with him, time and place that's entirely circumstantial, we're now going to start investigating them. Now, I'm not going to delve deeply into this because I know what a hot button subject it is, but I'm simply going to say that a lot of the January 6th arrests were based on whose cell phone was in the area at that time. And so this particular ruling might end up affecting a lot of those arrests because we have here a circuit split. The Fifth Circuit has declared that geofence warrants are unconstitutional. The Fourth Circuit has declared that it is constitutional. Circuit split, and that, it doesn't mean that it always ends up in front of SCOTUS, but it's usually a good indication that it's going to end up there. I think that the big problem with that right now is that it was like, I don't know if it was done for both circuits, but at least one of them was done in front of, 3 judges instead of, a proper en banc panel. And so it may need to go through the various circuits again, but there is a very good likelihood that this is going to end up in front of SCOTUS. And if it doesn't end up in front of SCOTUS, look, I don't know how they're going to rule. But if they rule that geofence warrants are unconstitutional, then a lot of people rounded up for January 6th are going to be set free. And that's really all I'm going to say about that particular hot button subject.
I will just say I gotta wonder if this ruling will also have anything to do with sobriety checkpoints, which is a thing that, again, in no way, shape, or form am I endorsing drunk driving at all. I'll just give my general flavor right here of you said, police aren't going to like this because it makes their job harder. And a great line, I think it was Chance from the Say Uncle blog, said, he was the first one I heard say it. He might have been copying somebody else, but he said, do you know what you call a place where the police's jobs is easy? It's called a police state. So sorry, guys. I respect our good members in blue. As the show will go on, you'll hear I have no respect for the people that do a terrible job, but those that do good work out there, you have my respect, and I think we need police. I think it's the police are a great thing to protect the pleasant society against people like us who will be like, oh, well, if I can't have somebody go after you and a court system to go after you, well, I might have to get creative. We don't want that. We do not want that. So, okay. So while you were talking, I found that the information that I was kind of looking for towards the end. So yes, both cases were 3-judge panel decisions. And there's the possibility that full appeals courts in both circuits could weigh in and could reach different conclusions. So, nothing is guaranteed at this point, but it is very interesting and it's worth watching. Yeah. But either way, the whole point of stop, picking a road that people believe may have, actually for me it was the waterfront of Portland, Maine has an extremely high density of bars. I mean, there are bars on top of bars. there. And the bridge between Portland and South Portland was frequently, especially on drinking holidays, was frequently a checkpoint for sobriety checkpoint, where they simply, I don't know if there's anybody out there who's never experienced one of these, but literally they will stop every car and look in the window and ask you how you're doing, ask if you've had anything to drink, and if nothing piques their interest, they move on. And I will say, I do remember the last sobriety checkpoint. I do remember looking over onto the corner, and there were a couple of people in handcuffs, and judging by the look of them, I was very, very glad that they were no longer behind the wheel of their cars, because they looked pretty loaded. So while that is a net good thing, we do have rights for a reason, and police are not allowed to stop your car until you actually do anything wrong. And so they have to wait. And let's be honest, it's pretty easy for a cop to say, "Oh, I saw you drift over the line." I mean, heck, even if you're perfectly sober and they've got their dash cam running. I've got a new car with lane assist, and it's always complaining, "Oh, you're a little too close to the line." So it could be fairly easy to say that you're weaving within your line and just pull you over and have a look if they've just decided for whatever reason to pull you over. But I would like for them to at least say that before they pull me over, rather than, "No, we're just going to stop everybody."
Well, I mean, it's also a difference in application. The officer saw you specifically, and whether for a good reason or a bad reason, singled you out, as opposed to, we've now got an assembly line of people that are lining up to be searched.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, yeah, this is a good one. And like you said, you said this to me going, I don't know if this is right for the show. And overall, I'm going to say that individual liberty kind of fits into the wheelhouse. And I like to point out that a lot of the people that are trying to take our guns away are also the type of people who don't much care for our Fourth Amendment rights, for our First Amendment rights, for our Third Amendment rights. Just you wait, et cetera, et cetera.
There was actually a Third Amendment case.
Yes, we did cover that.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we did.
Yeah, no, we did cover that. Yeah, for those that weren't around for that show, that was the police were holding a stakeout, or I can't remember if it was a stakeout or if they were staging an observation in somebody's apartment. So they literally knocked on the door of some innocent people who were doing nothing wrong, but they happened to have an apartment that had a good view of a place where somebody was, I think, had a hostage situation. And
I was about to say it was a hostage situation, and they were at the very least setting up observation, maybe even a sniper nest.
Yes, and so they kicked these people out of their home, and told them that they couldn't be there while the investigation was busy, and they sued and unfortunately lost under a Third Amendment case, which was pretty cool, saying that the cops kicking us out of our place so they could occupy our apartment was quartering troops in the home, which I think that's a pretty good argument. Unfortunately, the judge didn't agree.
So did I explain geofencing to your satisfaction?
Yes. Yep. No,
good.
I appreciate that. And it is one thing I've often see, especially as I'm kind of a true crime addict, where they will talk about having a suspect in a case that was, the boyfriend of someone or the husband of somebody who went missing. And they start looking at and so they actually have a warrant for the cell phone company for that person's cell phone data, and they start seeing where their cell phone has gone over the last month, week, whatever the time period is. That is perfectly fine. But yeah, here they're saying everyone who steps foot in this area with a cell phone, tell us who they are so we can look at them closer. And it's one of those, like, it's a public area. You're allowed to go there. I can even see who was on this private property. And I don't know, maybe I don't even know, but it is.
But that's not how most geofencing is used. It is used nearly exclusively in public areas.
Yeah. So it is very much like the DUI checkpoint. And again, you want to you want to search me, then come up with some probable cause, even shady, shaky probable cause, but at least make an effort. All right. This next up, I've actually got, we've got 2 videos that were submitted for our perusal by Xander. And there, I hadn't got a chance to look at them because the internet's not great on the island. And I've been busy. And so, but I looked at them and I'm like, oh no, these are really, really good videos. One is a video from a suburb of Las Vegas where I guess it was I'm trying to remember the specific details, but I think but essentially a man was fired. I think he was intoxicated at work. Do I remember that correctly, Aaron?
So I didn't hear the words intoxicated, but that was definitely the impression that I got. Okay. Yeah, there was a construction crew that was doing some sort of remodeling or some work like that, and a man showed up to work his shift, and his supervisor said that he was unfit to work and sent him home. Mm-hmm. Now, I've known enough contractors and known enough people who've worked with contractors to know that people showing up some degree of impaired is pretty common. A lot of them are functional alcoholics. And if this guy had been on, marijuana, he probably he wouldn't have been this aggressive. Marijuana and alcohol are the 2 top drugs. It might have been something else, but that's what I understood it to be. And after being told he was fired, he got in his car and attempted, I think he did manage to perhaps not run over, but definitely run into his boss. And he circled back a few times. I think he was going back and forth, and people were hurt and property was damaged. So he was very obviously an angry drunk.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, he did end up striking the boss who had let him go, and I'm trying to remember if it was 1 or 2 other bystanders.
Yeah, I mean it was at least 1. So he wasn't happy with just hitting the person who had fired him. He was having a temper tantrum and was taking it out on the entire street.
Yeah. I mean, he was tearing down fences and just doing a lot of damage. And so one of the neighbors heard this and came out of his house with the almighty street howitzer, as many like to call the 12-gauge shotgun. And according to witness reports and all of that, pretty much pointed the shotgun at him and told him to stop. He didn't do that, and as many will say, that was a bad choice. That was a bad choice, and he fired several rounds of 12 gauge into the car and ended the situation in a very definitive fashion.
Well, I want to put a finer point on this. It wasn't that the driver refused to stop. It was that the driver was headed towards the man with the shotgun. Mm-hmm. And so the shooting was in self-defense and also defense of others. And then after the shooting stopped, the young man, according to, I believe, his grandmother, he dropped his gun, fell to his knees, and I think held his hands to his head because he just realized he had killed a man and was very distraught about it because he didn't want to kill the man.
Yep.
And I believe his grandmother reassured him something like, "You saved all of our lives."
Yeah, well, that was what I was getting at is in watching the report, and I have a look. It's just one of the short news reports on it, so it's a pretty quick watch. But this man's grandmother's talking to that, and she's kind of doing a little bit of pearl clutching from my initial reading of the "Did you kill that man? Oh my goodness!" And she's acting very shocked and upset about what had happened, and I'm like, oh, is she going to throw her grandson under the bus
That was what I was afraid of too.
For shooting the guy. And then she said to the thing, not only did you save that man that was being, that was hit by the car, but you saved the entire block because he was just plowing through fences and driving into people's yards. And so, yeah, this is one of those instances where, it is, sounds like a very, very cut and dry affirmative defense. And it's every impression I get from the story, he's not going to be charged with anything, but is that not only was he likely, as you pointed out, with your little finer point, that he was absolutely defending his own life because the car was heading directly towards him as he was pumping rounds into the windshield, but also he was. But there was also, again, lots of other people around. And so the chances of somebody else, if he had run inside, somebody else getting hit and somebody else getting killed by that car was extremely high given what he was doing. So the fact that he put an end to this guy is pretty hard to argue as not being righteous violence. Mm-hmm. And Aaron, I know you love 12 gauge, so we can also note that they probably had to pour the guy out of the car.
I'm just sitting here wondering if the defender, he may not have been thinking, and that's perfectly acceptable. But I'm just wondering if he's going, I'll try and shoot the engine to disable it, and, with the spread, hit the driver, or if he was actually shooting at the driver himself. Nothing wrong with either way. I kind of want to know what the guy was thinking.
Well, I will say personally, from my knowledge of backyard ballistics and the fact that I have shot a car with a 12 gauge, several actually, I will say that unless you happen to be loaded with slugs, don't try to disable the car, because you might get lucky and a pellet of buckshot may bust a coolant hose or a fuel line or something, but I wouldn't bank on it. I would be definitely more on the more on the camp of just start filling the cabin with as much lead as you can and until things start looking better.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember how many shots he fired. There was more than one. I believe I remember that from the video. And, it's entirely possible. Well, okay. I think it's highly likely that he just had, buckshot. And maybe he was going, I'll try and, stop the car. And then it's like, that's not working. Oh, dang, I got to shoot the guy. That would fit a little more with the remorse.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I'm not saying that he's weak for feeling remorse, and I'm not saying that if you shoot someone in self-defense and you don't feel remorse, there's something wrong with you. It's just, it was an unusual reaction, and I guess I'm trying to figure it out. And so in my mind, it makes sense where he's going, I want to try and stop this guy without hurting him. And, it's not working. Dang, I have to hurt him. And that to me would explain, why he felt so very strongly when it was all finished.
Well, I will say that if you haven't, a good read might be Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman's book on killing. It's not a perfect book at all, but overall it was a very, very very, very good book. And one thing that I was probably the big takeaway from it is how much effort the military has to put into getting it so that when soldiers are confronted with the enemy, they are able to engage them lethally. Because even on something like a battlefield, and you're up against a soldier uniformed as your enemy, and you both have weapons, many people will hesitate unless they are very, very properly conditioned. So, I don't judge it at all. And there's a lot of conditioning that that specifically the Army, but I'm sure the other branches do as well, to try to break through that reluctance to kill another human being that most people have.
I mean, I'm certain the Marines do it because every Marine is first and foremost a rifleman.
Mm-hmm.
Navy and Air Force, I don't know. I also don't know to what extent the police do it too, because on the one hand, you don't want the police to be callous about killing. You don't want the police to become militarized. On the other hand, if the police need to shoot someone in the line of duty, you need them to be able to actually shoot rather than hesitate or deliberately miss.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll be getting into it a little bit later with my Fisk, but certainly the active shooter, FBI active shooter training is openly says, and police officers are trained that in the event of an active shooter case, you are to directly engage the shooter and just start sending rounds at them and try to take them out. And so you certainly have that sort of idea. And of course, there's a lot of training that people will do as going for buckshot. I remember reading some stories of police officers in some pretty nasty shootouts. And one of the techniques that they utilized was firing the buckshot rounds underneath a car that is going, so that they could skip the buckshot into the legs and feet of the attacker. So there's a lot of lethal training that goes in. So once you have those tools in the toolbox, hopefully they're thinking about it the right way. So moving on to the next video that Xander sent, and I know the reason why he sent it, but I think Aaron and I, we both ended up digging way deeper into this one. This is it's an older story. It's actually one that we covered earlier on the podcast. I mean, but it was, several years ago. This is from the December 2022 shooting in Wieambilla, Australia. I don't know how to pronounce that.
I have no idea either. The only thing I know is that the police, or at least some of the police, were dispatched from Chinchilla Station, which makes me giggle.
It makes me scratch my head because I thought chinchillas were indigenous to the Andes Mountains, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Well, I mean, come on, we've got a Paris, Texas. So, just because a name is indigenous to a place doesn't mean you can't have other things. I'm for crying out loud, Australia has New South Wales. So,
and I am from Maine, and there is that famous sign, I think it's in Rumford, that talks about this way to Egypt, this way to Paris, this way to we call it Calais, but Calais. There's all these in central Maine. There are all of these towns that are named after famous places. Moscow, Maine.
So I think this is just a logical outgrowth of English being three raccoons in a trench coat.
Absolutely. But yes, so this story is essentially the reason why we're talking about this is that the body cam footage of the shooting was just released. And I'll say it's, I don't know. I didn't really actually pull a whole lot away from the body cam footage. It's, it's kind of a tough shoot to watch, and the fact that the police are walking through this, very, very wooded, rural, area. I think they're essentially it's a long driveway to a rural homestead, and the killers in this story essentially were lying in wait to ambush the police with bolt action rifles, and ended up engaging the police from such a distance that they had no earthly idea where the shots were coming from, and very quickly killed two of the officers. And the body cam footage you have is from a third officer who, in the report, says was wounded in the hip. I'd be interested to see what the wounded in the hip means. I kind of got to wonder if it was a Forrest Gump, they shot me in the buttocks, because
yeah, I get the impression that they shot him while he was running for his car.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, within like the first few seconds, one officer was shot dead, and another was shot and knocked down and wounded, but she was making a report. It's worth pointing out that they were in a radio blackout zone. So she was basically making a report to her her body camera. And we don't see it, but one of the suspects walks up to her and basically executes her by shooting her in the head at point-blank range, and then he has her semi-auto pistol. And the same thing that happened with the other officer that was shot. So in addition to their high-powered hunting rifles, I probably just made a gun grabber thing by calling a hunting rifle high-powered. Sorry, but the point that I'm making is that they were far more powerful than just the Glock pistols that the police officers have. But, in addition to the bolt-action rifles, which had range and power, they also then had semi-auto, pistol capability. And the two officers that survived, they both survived by taking cover. The man, Constable Kirk, hid behind a tree, ducked down. He took a couple of shots, but he couldn't hit. And he was actually able to get in touch with his sergeant at the station by cell phone. And he explained the situation, and the sergeant said something like, "Look, you've got to take care of yourself." And that's when he ran. And he ran something like about 100 yards over very open terrain, and then had to... he didn't hurdle a fence. He did that thing where he basically dove and then rolled over it. And then as he's getting in the car and driving away, there are at least 2 hits to the car window. I don't know if he was hit there at all or if it was just from the glass. But yeah, he was the one that was hit in the hip, and I think it was while he was running. And, the entire time I'm watching that, I received some very, very light military training when I was in ROTC. I don't consider myself anywhere near a soldier, but I'm watching that run, and I'm thinking, evade, zig. Actually, literally what I'm thinking is what I was taught is we were told to do 3 to 5 second buddy rushes. And the idea is you go, I'm up, I'm seen, I'm down. And then when you say I'm down, you literally get down on the ground because you want to prevent people from tracking you. It's like, okay, he's running in that direction at that speed. I'm just going to lead a little bit and bang, dead. And so I'm watching that. I'm going, dude, get down, take cover, weave, do something. Mm-hmm. It's kind of remarkable that he ran what looked like a very straight line and only got hit in the hip. And they didn't mention anything about a long hospital stay, so I'm guessing it was primarily a flesh wound.
Yeah, had to have been. But it was also enough for him to, I was kind of surprised I remember when I was in Ireland, we got picked up in a Toyota or a Honda minivan, and that's this model year, the ones in America have the gear selector like way up on the dashboard, like next to the radio. And this one was a manual transmission. And so the gear shift lever was right there. And I'm just like trying to figure out the math of how many linkages it needs to have to transmit all that mechanical force into the transmission. And I got talking to him about that. And he was just noting the fact that, it's an oddity in Ireland to see an automatic transmission car. And clearly it's the same way in Australia because even the police vehicles there are manual transmissions.
So the other surviving officer, Keely Brow, perhaps Broth, I'm not sure how you would pronounce that, a female officer, she ducked in a different direction. She hid in like 8-inch grass, and she remained online. I guess she got on her phone as well and was talking to a 911 operator, and she was whispering because the 3 people that were shooting at the officers were looking for her, and when they couldn't find her, they started a brush fire in order to either smoke her out or burn her alive. And the fire got so close to her that it was something like 3 feet from her shoes. And the I believe in Australia they have 000 as opposed to 911, but the emergency dispatcher was there with her and just trying to keep her calm. And, she's asking, what do I do? And the dispatcher's going, I don't know. But fortunately for the officer, other police did arrive in time. And it's not explained how the coast was cleared, but Constable Brow was given the code that it's okay, you can run, and she ran, and she escaped. But in order to take in these 3 people, the Queensland, actually I don't know what municipality it is, but it was in Queensland, they basically used their version of a SWAT team. I think they called it, they call them the specialists informally. Yeah, Special Emergency Response Team. And so that's basically their SWAT. And the perpetrators were shooting at them as well. And, it didn't end well for the 3 people that started shooting at the police because they were all shot dead.
I will just note that I think that's a perfectly reasonable way for them to end.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
This was... the police didn't do anything wrong, but there was definitely a failure in communications because these 3 people were part of an apocalyptic Christian cult. They basically believed that Jesus had come again, although I don't think they really knew who he was, but we were definitely in the end times of tribulation, and agents of the state were serving the Antichrist, and they had some kind of wingnut opinions about, the state, taking people and hollowing them out, and, people becoming skin suits. And so at least one of the people had already been suspected, had a warrant. It's kind of unclear to me of crossing state lines with weapons, and there was something about dumping weapons. And there was also the equivalent of a restraining order placed on one of these 3 people. By the way, this family, you've got 2 brothers and a woman, and I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm judging them. It does seem weird to me, but the woman had been married to one of the brothers, had divorced him, and then had married the other brother.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing specifically wrong with that, but it's just strikes me as being weird, and I'm trying not to be judgy, but I end up judging them, and I know I shouldn't.
I mean, they're bad people. You don't necessarily assume someone is a bad person for how they live their life, if they've been divorced, who they choose to remarry and that sort of stuff. But these people have clearly told on themselves. So we're saying that maybe not everybody that's like that. If there's somebody listening, here who got divorced and got remarried to a brother or sister of the partner that you're divorced, we're not necessarily judging you, though. Again, in this instance where apocalyptic, and end times death cult, and you've got the brothers married to, the brothers sharing a tossing a wife back and forth, and all that, and they're all there. That's the part that really gets me, is one of those like, okay, I could see divorcing one brother and marrying the other one, but I don't know how that works very well when you guys are all on speaking terms.
I know it seems like there's the potential for a lot of baggage and drama and hurt feelings, but we've gotten off the point.
Yes.
The point that I'm getting at is that at least one of these people has already come under suspicion of bad things. And if various other agencies had done their job, had processed the information, a flag would have been thrown so that when these 4 officers show up in order to do like a wellness check, possibly arrest. In other words, they went in expecting this to be pretty normal. And if other agencies had done their job, they would have said, oh, I have every reason to believe that this is an unstable person with access to firearms. Yeah, we're not going to walk across, 100 yards plus of completely open terrain. Maybe we should have some cover or an armored vehicle or something like that. So I think that at least half of the guilt, or perhaps guilt is a strong word, but responsibility for those officers' deaths lies with the Australian government that didn't do the paperwork.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that is a good point. And speaking of paperwork, one thing that this has done, I mean, obviously we covered this story like 2 years ago, and it's just coming back up now because of the various inquests that are going on about this, which I've no idea. I did a little bit of digging, but could not figure out why the heck we're talking about all of this now. And all this stuff is coming out now, but it is. And, but in reading up on it, because we haven't really been following it, and it's another country, and, they can do what they want, but because this is also another country that is frequently praised by our politicians, on what good things they've quote unquote done, by banning and restricting guns. I do like to point out that, hey, all those gun control laws, these guys were able to lay down an ambush with just simple hunting rifles, and all that. And Aaron, you mentioned, high-powered rifles, and yeah, it's a little bit of a loaded term, but also at the same time, like, anything that's designed to take a deer-sized animal at several hundred yards is going to have quite a bit of power behind it. And so even with all the quote unquote safe guns, anything can be misused. I mean, we just covered a story about a car being used as a murder weapon. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, I have an article here where they actually, on the, 20th anniversary of the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, which was the big spree shooting that led the Australian government to crack down on firearms, and that's where you got the. If you've been following any, Second Amendment propaganda and news, you've seen the piles and piles of guns in Australia that were being destroyed because of the essentially mandatory buyback, as they like to call, basically turn them in now or we'll send you to prison. 28th anniversary of the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, and the Australian government has installed a national firearms registry. This article is an absolute puff piece. There's no Second Amendment or they don't have a Second Amendment there, but firearms rights activist talking there, and that's not for lack of their existence. There is absolutely some very, very strong firearms rights groups in Australia, and hats off to you guys, because you're fighting against a nasty tide. You're making what I'm dealing with here in Massachusetts look like a cakewalk. But they ended up putting in a registry, and this thing is they don't really give the full example, statement on, like, all right, you're going to have a registry. How are you going to do it? Because there's a lot of guns in Australia. It's there's a large hunting culture. There's also some self-defense. There's a lot of sport shooting. There's a lot of people with a lot of guns there.
Let's not also forget the farmers and the ranchers who have to defend against wild animals, like dingoes.
Yep. Or even kangaroos. Oh my God. I was watching a video of somebody taking of a kangaroo working a heavy bag, and the heavy bag was all taped up with duct tape because he's laying it open with his nails. There's a lot of stuff that wants to kill you in Australia. I don't blame them. But yeah, They ended up getting a gun registry. I don't know how it's going to go through, but of course there is the standard praise of this will increase public safety. And if it does increase public safety, it will be the first gun registry to ever do that, because gun registries have, as far as I know, never been used to stop or solve a crime. They have only been used for when a gun ban comes through, they can come and knock on your door and say, here's this gun registry to you, hand it over, or we put you in handcuffs.
Well, it also shows that once you start down the road of firearm prohibition, it's never enough, and they always want more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the Port Arthur shooting, so they implemented gun control. And then more shootings happened, and they implement more gun control. And here they are, despite having very stringent gun control laws, very restrictive gun control laws, and now they've got this firearm registry. And again, let's point out that those 2 police officers were killed by bolt-action rifles. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more prohibitionism in Australia's future.
Yeah, they're certainly going to give a try of it. So again, our hearts go out to the people in Australia. Our hearts also go out to the families of the officers who were killed, and to the officers who dealt with all of this. That was, I mean, the scary part is it's one thing to be in a situation where you are toe-to-toe with a criminal who's trying to kill you. It's another thing when you are taking incoming rounds and seeing compatriots drop from an unseen attacker because they are hidden in such a way that they're able to engage you with their guns, but you don't even have an idea of where they're coming from. So that was a horrendous ambush that they endured.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on from the main topics to our contributors. David tells us about his goals. The Gun Owners Advocacy and Leadership Summit, that is.
Hi, and welcome to Gun Lovers and Other Strangers. Most of our listeners are familiar with the NRA annual meeting of members. Some of them may have attended one or more of these events. In this segment, I'd like to talk about the first annual Gun Owners of America Goals event. GOALS stands for Gun Owners Advocacy and Leadership Summit, and was put on by Gun Owners of America and sponsored by Brownells. As a podcaster, I signed up for a media pass, and in addition to the regular weekend events, I was also able to attend the industry range day on Thursday. That morning, I drove out to Opie in the Smokies, the hosting location. It's just over an hour southwest of Knoxville. I got there about 10 minutes before official start time and collected my badge. Before shooting began, there were a series of announcements, starting with a safety brief. The fellow running this part used group participation to go over the 4 rules, which I thought was a good touch. This was followed by some specifics for the range setup. Due to the lay of the land and the number of shooting stations, the firing line was slightly curved. I did find this concerning. However, he informed us RSOs would give 1 warning for minor infractions, but a repeat or more significantly unsafe behavior would mean ejection from the firing line. Period. Following the safety brief, the owner of the venue, Josh Winzit, was called forward and we gave him a round of applause and thanks for making his property available. He urged attendees to purchase from participating vendors, be safe, and have fun. Next was an opening prayer. Being Jewish and not particularly religious, these always make me feel slightly out of place and self-conscious. But I bowed my head respectfully regardless. Last but not least was a traditional rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. No theatrics or vocal gyrations, just the anthem as intended. As the singer reached the last line, right at the end of Home of the Brave, a mad minute of firing began. For those not familiar, Mad Minute is rapid fire of as many rounds as possible in the time allotted. After that, range day began in earnest. As I mentioned earlier, the event was sponsored by Brownells, and they had a number of people at their booth, including Steve and Caleb from their YouTube Smithbusters series. Both gentlemen were quite approachable and were willing to chat and pose for pictures. And yes, Caleb's hair looks just as perfect in person. I spent some time visiting the other attending vendors and among the expected items got to examine some interesting products. among which was the ice plate by Core. Simply put, it's a ballistic plate-shaped water bottle that can be frozen for cooling the wearer or filled with warm water for use in winter environments. There are 2 models, plain and with included drinking tube. If they'd had a cooler full of them at range day, they probably would have sold out by lunchtime. Another product that caught my attention was the Infinity Targets by Infinite Defense. These are molded rubber targets that are reported to last for 5,000 to 6,000 rounds of use before needing replacement. After watching them take quite a bit of punishment at range day, I can believe it. I didn't get to shoot as much as I would have liked, due in part to the number of people present, but also because I need to be careful about overheating. Which leads me to another product that got my attention, Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier, a flavored powder that's intended to be added to water, 1 packet per 16 ounces. While I find most of the flavored powders on the market have a chemical aftertaste, the Liquid IV didn't. I especially enjoyed the lemon-lime flavor. I almost certainly exceeded the suggested daily usage, but I did stay hydrated and comfortable, despite the heat and sun. In addition to shooting and drinking water, I got the chance to hang out and chat with a number of interesting people. I already mentioned Steve and Caleb from Brownells. I was able to speak to Sam Paradis, a board member of GOA and executive director of Gun Owners of California, the state-level affiliate. I hope to coordinate with him for an interview for a later episode. I had a nice conversation with Jared Gomez of SDS Imports. This is the company which brings in guns from Tisas, Tokarev, Inglis, and others. Last but certainly not least, my Operation Blazing Sword t-shirt got me noticed by Tony Simon, or as Aaron christened him, Chocolate Godzilla. Like me, Tony was one of the early volunteer instructors with OBS and is one of the nicest guys you're likely to meet. Even though he still lives behind the curtain in New Jersey, Tony manages to keep a positive attitude. But I know what our listeners are really waiting to hear about. The guns. As I said, I didn't get to shoot as much as I wanted, but I was able to test fire some interesting firearms. Bond Arms filled a table by themselves. While I'm not crazy enough to fire their 45-70 single-shot Derringer, I did run a magazine through their rendition of the Boberg Bullpup 9mm pistol. I need to do an entire segment on this unusual design for a future episode. Also from Bond was a pre-production copy of their LVRB, a lever-action AR pattern rifle. As a lever-action and AR fan, this was particularly interesting and I had to give it a try. The version at the shoot was chambered in 5.56 NATO, but it will also eventually be offered in 300 Blackout, 350 Legend, and 450 Bushmaster. I was quite impressed by the smooth and relatively short lever throw, as well as the crisp trigger. I live in a free state, so a rifle with these features isn't a necessity for me. Still, I expect it to sell well in both ban and non-ban states. DSA had a few FALs available, including both a full-length rifle and paratrooper carbine painted in Rhodesian baby poop camo. Never one to pass up a chance to fire the right arm of the free world, I ran some rounds through them. A pleasure as always. Southern Precision Tooling had a repro-ish Colt 607 with their special muzzle device attached. Even shooting full auto out of such a short barrel, it kept muzzle climb remarkably controllable. In addition, they make a line of budget-friendly suppressors that slip over their muzzle brakes. Next Level Armament brought their Phoenix left-handed 5.56 AR rifle and Horus radial delay 9mm AR pistol. As a southpaw, the Phoenix was especially pleasant, and the Horus was both lighter and softer shooting than nearly any other firearm in its class. A firearm I had to shoot right-handed was the Reap Weaponry's Sky bullpup adapter for standard ARs. It can be used with both traditional and bufferless uppers. Though this one was set up for righties, they assured me it works just fine with left-handed uppers as well. I couldn't resist the Staccato XL 9mm painted like a 1980s Trapper Keeper. Regardless of the finish, an outstanding pistol. Henry also had a number of firearms on their table, but I had to try the Big Boy revolver. I shot the version with the standard plowshare grips. Though large, it balanced well. The single-action trigger was excellent, though the double-action was a bit heavier than I expected. I would have liked to try the bird's head grip version, but that one was in constant rotation. Finally, possibly the most unusual item on the firing line was the Liberty Manufacturing Pen Gun, a single-shot 22 long rifle AOW. The design is extremely interesting. I'll have to get into it in more detail another time. This was merely the first day of an eventful weekend. The next 3 days were at the Expo Center, where I was able to browse all sorts of products and talk to many of the vendors. In addition, I was able to record some interviews on the convention floor, and I hope to coordinate others in the weeks to come. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get some rest.
The owls fly forth from the treetops. Through the air they soar and they sweep. A hot crimson rage fills my heart, love. For real, shut the fuck up and sleep.
That about wraps up this segment. If you have any questions for me or suggestions for future segments or a comment on a past segment, please post them on the Assorted Calibers Podcast Facebook or MeWe pages, and Aaron or Weer'd will make sure I see them. I'm also a contributor on the Blue Collar Prepping blog, which can be found at bluecollarprepping.blogspot.com. Finally, I'm a published author, and books with my stories can be found on Amazon under the names Brenna Bach and David Bach. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. I'm David, and this is Gun Lovers and Other Strangers.
So I just want to point out that Tony Simon gave me permission to refer to him as Chocolate Godzilla, okay? I didn't just decide to call him that. I realized it could be a sensitive subject. I asked his permission. He thought it was funny. He said I could.
He thought it was hilarious. I was sitting beside him when you called him that for the first time, and I mean, I'm amazed he eventually did stop laughing.
I mean, he calls himself, I want to say, like, the biggest pound-for-pound firearms instructor in America. He has very little ego in that regard. He pokes fun at himself. And, yeah, he's just this wonderful man. He's got a great sense of humor. And so I gave him a nickname that, I mean, at least to me, indicates, you know, how much of a big ol' sweetheart he is, because he's big like Godzilla, and he's sweet like chocolate.
Mm-hmm. And he lives in New Jersey, and he is fighting against the tide there, which is no cakewalk either. To reach out to the people of New Jersey and educate them about the Second Amendment and how the Second is for everyone, and trying to cross both the political and the racial boundaries that some people think exist within the Second Amendment community, and to a lesser extent they do. But we're trying to break those down here at the Assorted Calibers podcast as well. The Second is for everybody. It doesn't matter what your political views are. There's no reason why the Second Amendment is just a Republican issue or anything like that. Like the Second Amendment is for everybody. It's plain and simple as that. So yeah, ACP needs to get back on the road so we can start seeing some of the other 2A supporters we've grown to know and love. So I definitely want to get back to some of these events. I kind of fell into a bad habit after the pandemic, and things kind of got iffy, and I want to see more events.
So I also want to point out that Tony Simon, because you talked about Second Amendment for everyone, 2A, 4E. But he also has a wonderful organization called the Diversity Shoot. Mm-hmm. And you can find that at diversityshoot.com. And so that's how he's teaching people about firearms in the dark territory of anti-gun New Jersey. So if you're in the area, look him up and go to a Diversity Shoot.
Also, I've got to say that, David, your choice of Sam Jackson reading "Go the F to Sleep" made me smile. Oh, every parent on earth has listened to that mock children's book and felt it to be very cathartic. All right, moving on. I've got a Fisk, and this, due to my frequent travelings, this got interrupted heavily. I've been working on this for like almost 2 months now, off and on, and now it's finally complete. And so this is a Fisk of an outlandish speech by the Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy on the floor of the Senate about the Uvalde shooting. So while I'm a little late on on getting this audio to you. It's the Uvalde shooting, so it is very timeless. And it also shows that even old blood can still be danced in if you're ghoulish enough. This is a bad one. So the DOJ published a report on the spree killing at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. This establishes an official timeline for both the killer and the police in this incident. They outline mistakes made by law enforcement and give suggestions how to avoid these problems in the future. It's a really good report, and I highly recommend you go read it. The link is in the show notes. That being said, somebody who clearly did not read the report was anti-gun Connecticut Senator, but I repeat myself, Chris Murphy. The following fisc will be his egregious speech made on the floor of the Senate on June 17th, 2024.
After 2 years of review, investigation, hand-wringing, grief, and anger, we now have as full a picture of what happened that day as we ever will. And we need to talk about it because it's important.
As I said above, either Senator Murphy didn't read it or he read it and didn't care what it said because he was going to be pitching his standard agenda anyway.
Here's what we know. 1 hour and 17 minutes after a gunman entered Robb Elementary School and opened fire on 2 classrooms full of children. 54 minutes after a school police officer got a call from his wife who said that she had been shot in her classroom. 38 minutes after a 911 dispatcher told police there were confirmed victims in the classrooms. Only then did a team of officers finally enter room 111 at Robb Elementary School and kill the gunman. 1 hour and 17 excruciating minutes.
As you will hear, and likely what you already know, the police response to the shooting at Robb Elementary was horrible. I'm going to get angry in this fisc, and I'm going to try not to swear, and you all know I'll fail. But before I get spitting mad, I'll point out that this is a hierarchy of horrible behavior. Obviously, the person who did the shooting is pure evil. They were a coward. They were a sorry excuse for a human. What they did was pure evil, and I'm glad he's dead. But the absolute cowardice and dereliction of duty done by the police who responded is breathtakingly horrible. And of course, Chris Murphy peddling misinformation to push his backwards agenda is also bad and shameful.
The students in rooms 111 and 112 had prepared for this moment. They had practiced what they should do if something like this were to happen. Drop to the floor, sit along the walls farthest from the door and the windows, crouch under desks, countertops, anywhere where you can be safe. They stayed silent, so silent that the officers on the other side of the door thought that there couldn't possibly be children inside. Surely they would be crying out. But they were doing, in fact, exactly what they were told to do. They were doing their part.
From the reports, it does seem that the kids did all the right things. Some shelter-in-place protocols have the kids all pile up in a corner, which goes bad fast when the gunman breaches because they are literally fish in a barrel. Keeping a low profile, staying silent, and keeping the lights off is a good tactic to not attract the predator. Of course, the Jeff Cooper quote comes to mind. An unarmed man can only flee from evil, and fleeing from evil will never defeat it.
As the minutes went on, outside the classroom stood not 10 armed officers, not 50, not even 100. Outside the classroom and surrounding the school, 376 armed officers were present outside the classroom. Inside the classroom, 10-year-old Aylin Ramos hugged her friend Leanne Garcia to stop her screaming out in pain.
So I cut there as he detailed multiple people who were injured, but initially survived. I don't put them all in there because we know how horrible this event was. Further, I didn't cross-reference this with the documentation on the shooting to see how many of these wounded survived, but I know that many of them succumbed to their wounds while the police were standing outside doing nothing. I will add that not only were these officers equipped with rifles, body armor, and shields that were rated to stop rifle rounds, they had superior numbers. They were also trained in the FBI active shooter response, which is detailed in this very report Senator Murphy is citing. The training is gather intelligence en route, and then again on the scene, seek out and engage the attacker, and then identify and treat the injured. The report also documents that the school was placed on full lockdown when the killer crashed his truck, and all the teachers followed their training. They locked all the exterior doors and all the classroom doors, except the exterior door the shooter entered and one of the classroom doors the shooter entered did not properly locked. I'm unable to find why the doors weren't locked, but all the evidence shows it was not operator error by the teachers. Senator Murphy will spend zero time talking about how poorly the police performed when they entered the school and how poorly the safety equipment in the school performed, because he's a gun banner and he's here to ban guns and restrict the rights of people who weren't even there that day, not keep children safe.
As 33 students and 3 of their teachers spent an hour and 17 minutes trapped in a room with an active shooter, those hundreds of armed adults stood outside. Doing what? Well, they were doing the things that would naturally occur to you if you hear a man with military weapons and hundreds of rounds of ammunition is just around the corner from you on a killing spree. They were scared. They were disorganized. They were panicked. They were frozen.
Also in the report lists the FBI research that says that the average spree shooting resolves in about 12 minutes after the first shot is fired. Either the shooter gets tired of shooting and kills themselves, they surrender to the police, or somebody engages the shooter and brings the event to an end. As I mentioned above, and what's written in the report that Senator Murphy claims to have read, that's the job of the responding officers to force that ending. Even if you have no backup, even if you're not wearing armor or only have soft armor, even if you only have your duty pistol or your off-duty pistol on you, you are to charge towards the threat. Not just because it's the heroic thing to do, but it's because it's been proven by law enforcement research to be the best case scenario. Senator Murphy is correct. The normal human response is to run and hide. But these aren't normal people. These are police officers. The idea of riding around on the back of a truck in the hot sun stinking of garbage sounds horrible to most people. But if you're a garbage collector, you have to get over that. Having your hands cut up and covered with grease as you get covered in dirt seems like a pretty bad time, but it's just Tuesday for an auto mechanic. Getting a skittish cow out of a pond of manure in the hot sun is something most people can't do, but Xander's probably doing it right now on his farm. If you can't perform the duties of your job, you shouldn't do that job. And I believe every officer, with the exception of the ones that were arrested for attempting to do their job, and the officers who breached the room and killed the murderer, should be fired and never allowed to wear a badge again for the rest of their lives. They took an oath to protect the people and uphold the law, and that oath was tested, and they failed.
There were good people amongst those 376, but they were all providing natural reactions given the circumstance.
Nope, they were people who signed up and cashed the checks to be first responders. And when the time came, they failed. And because of their failure, people died. The shooter is prime evil here. But some of his victims could have been saved had the police done their job. I wouldn't be opposed to criminal charges for such negligence. But the least we should do is make sure they never wear a uniform or a badge again, and we certainly can't call them good people. In the show notes, I have video footage from the police response to the Covenant school shooting in Nashville. And I will say, my heart races watching this video. And I know that I'm safe and the good guys won. The officers there must have been terrified, but they had a job to do. Also, I have the footage for the shooting in White Settlement, Texas, where a deranged man with a shotgun entered a church, and 3 parishioners engaged the gunman when they realized things were going bad. 2 of these parishioners, Richard White and Anton Wallace, lost their lives. But they lost their lives aiding Jack Wilson in killing the attacker. Both of these shootings could have been worse. And we have seen shootings like Pulse and Parkland where police did not engage the shooter directly and waited. It does get worse as the killer is allowed more time to kill and the wounded are kept separate from emergency medical care. Calling the cowards in Orlando, Parkland, and Uvalde good people tarnishes the names of true heroes who did the right and brave thing and saved lives.
But that does not excuse their inaction. Of course it doesn't. Because the adults in Uvalde had bought into this idea that more security, more men with guns in schools would keep those kids safe. In fact, the Uvalde School District placed so much faith in the ability of armed security to keep schools safe that it had its own school police department. But all those men with guns didn't protect. The opposite happened.
Now, this is the best glimpse into the mind of an anti-gun politician or anti-gun lobbyist. They read the report where the school had a procedure, training, and equipment to fortify the school in the event of the threat. And those procedures and training were followed, but the locks failed. The police had a rapid response, ample equipment, and good training, but they failed to act on that training. And after reading all of this, the solution they call for is banning guns, defunding the police, and suing FedEx and Activision. These are not sane or normal people, and we shouldn't pretend like they are.
Because it shows how flawed this promise is. This promise that good guys with guns is all that is necessary to stop bad guys with guns.
Said about a shooting where the only thing that brought this to an end was an officer breaking through the cowardice and breaching the room and killing the gunman with his own firearm. The only reason why this got as bad as it did is because all the cops in the world doing nothing won't stop a crazed gunman.
One of those officers kept moving towards the classroom, but he turned back when he realized that none of his colleagues had followed him. Again, this reaction from those initial police officers, it's understandable. There was a madman inside that classroom. Instinct tells you to run away, not run towards danger.
He was trained to keep going. The officers were trained to keep going. They all failed. Further, they had rifles, body armor, and ballistic shields. Yeah, it's scary. But if you can't take this kind of heat, you should never be a cop.
Sergeant Coronado relayed an unconfirmed report that the gunman was contained and had barricaded himself inside the classroom, leading officers to believe that they were dealing with a barricaded subject, not an active shooter. Active shooter training says rush into the classroom, but they didn't think it was an active shooter, so they didn't act with urgency.
Emphasis on unconfirmed. Did somebody mistake the classroom for an empty room? Seems doubtful. Or did somebody cook up an excuse for them disregarding their training and do what they did, which was nothing? Given the amount of cowardice and incompetence, I find this story much more believable.
Now, part of the confusion was that there was no clear command structure. There was no one to give orders. There were probably lots of men with guns that wanted to go in, but were told that they couldn't. But there really was no excuse. At one point, the officers claimed that they needed keys, but they admitted not a single officer even walked up to the door to check if it was unlocked. Why? Because they all knew that inside that classroom was a young man equipped with military-style weaponry that could kill them, that would kill them the instant they opened that door.
Again, all this incompetence and disregard for training, and Murphy blames the gun.
Finally, at 12:50 p.m., 77 minutes after the shooter entered the school, a team of officers breached the room and killed the gunman.
These are the only officers who have any right to still wear a badge.
So what does this tell us? What can we learn from this? Because we are commanded to learn something from these tragedies.
What the hell, Chris? You've read the report and ignored everything. You even seem to ignore the fact that there are bulleted problems and recommended solutions at the end of each section of the report. Did you even read this? Or did you see Robb Elementary School show up on your desk and say, "Oh, goody, time for me to talk about dead kids and demand more gun control," like a friggin' sociopath?
I know human instinct. I know we have a biological inclination to want to fight fire with fire. So our first reaction when we see the threat of a deranged young man with a gun is to mirror that threat with our defensive reaction. If a gunman steps into a building where our kids are, we want them to be met with equal force. Confront a bad guy with a gun with a good guy with a gun.
The moment cops stopped acting like speed bumps and actually dispensed righteous violence, the killer was dead within 2 minutes of officers breaching the classroom. The whole basis for the FBI active shooter training is to confront the shooter with rapid and decisive violence as quickly as possible, because the moment they encounter serious resistance, they stop killing innocent victims and either kill themselves or start fighting for their lives. Are you saying the FBI training is wrong, Chris? That's what it sounds like you're saying. But you just won't admit it. Probably because Chris Murphy is as cowardly as he is ghoulish. Also, lastly, this would be a great time to note that in 1990, the Gun-Free School Zone Act was signed into law. It was passed in reaction to the Stockton schoolyard shooting in Stockton, California in 1989. Though that gunman engaged students on the playground and never entered the school. It wasn't until 1999 that the Columbine school shooting happened. In 2007, the Virginia Tech shooting. Before the Gun-Free School Zone Act, school shootings were virtually unknown. I can't prove that the Gun-Free School Zone Act emboldened school shooters, though the fact that shooters often surrender or kill themselves when police arrive, and manifestos often consider police response time, that certainly supports the theory. Gun control clearly hasn't helped school safety.
And when we wrote the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most comprehensive gun legislation in 30 years, it made important changes to our gun laws and invested in mental health, but it also provided $300 million for school hardening. So I'm on the record as supporting putting more security in our schools.
Except the report notes that the school executed a perfect lockdown when the attacker entered the school grounds. But the locks didn't work. If you care so much about hardening the schools, why did you just ignore the most important failure of school security? Again, he doesn't care about school safety. He cares about banning guns.
In 1970, police officers were stationed in just 1% of America's public schools. By 1997, 22% had an officer on site, 43% in 2016. By 2019, the majority of schools had a police officer on site. You can match almost every uptick with a high-profile school shooting. But despite this exponential increase in armed officers at schools, the shootings have not abated. They have increased in frequency.
He's blaming school resource officers for school shootings? Are you going to give a mechanism of action for your theory? Because I can't think of one. But I did give a theory that the Gun-Free School Zone Act does have some strong correlations to school shooters feeling that these are ideal targets to attack.
We should have seen this with our own eyes. Well before Uvalde, when the gunshots started at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, the armed police at the school that day ran away and then argued in court that they had no legal obligation to protect those kids, only an obligation to protect themselves.
The court case is Warren versus District of Columbia. While it's good court law from my non-legal reading, it certainly sets a bad precedent when you look at events like this. And does Senator Murphy present laws that would add consequences to peace officers who put their personal safety over the safety of innocents who they swore to protect? Nope. He just wants to take away your magazine and have the ATF murder you if you sell a gun to a friend for more than you paid for it.
A study of 179 school shootings between 1999 and 2019 found that there was no association between the presence of a police officer in a school and any reduction in the severity of violence and shootings in those schools.
But the FBI concluded that if police rapidly respond to the shooting, there is a positive correlation, and it's in the report that you allegedly read. The police at Columbine had no idea what was going on. They thought it was a hostage scenario, so they waited for demands that never came. And of course, the police at Uvalde, Parkland, and Pulse did nothing right. So they didn't improve the outcome. Meanwhile, there are countless incidents where the shooter was engaged swiftly and the loss of life was minimal, if not zero.
When you really stop to think about this, it does make sense. A shooter with an AR-15 needs a minute or two to get off enough rounds to kill dozens, even if the armed security officer does the right thing and runs to the gunfire instead of the natural thing, running away from it. Time is on the shooter's side.
This isn't wrong, but ignores that rapid and heroic police response is the difference between a few dead and dozens of dead. Most attacks where police or bystanders respond rapidly don't even meet the gun violence archive definition of a spree killing, let alone the FBI definition.
So it is not surprising that there is no evidence that more guns in our schools keep our kids safe.
No, you just ignored all the evidence because you want to ban guns.
What tends to happen, frankly, when police officers populate our schools is that ordinary school misbehaviors get criminalized. And kids, especially black boys and disabled students, get arrested for things that used to be dealt with in the principal's office.
On one hand, I don't like how misbehavior in schools has turned to the job of law enforcement rather than in-school discipline. But if students are committing legit crimes, why should they simply be disciplined by the school and their crimes go unreported? Further, let's note the many mishandlings of the Parkland shooter. The school had engaged in an intervention program where law enforcement was not notified of his violent behavior, and instead he was disciplined in school. And we saw how well that worked. Still, the Bipartisan Safer Community Act demands enhanced background checks on gun owners between 18 and 21. So really, Senator Murphy wants this too.
If good guys with guns protected us from gun violence, you would expect states or communities with high rates of legal gun ownership to be safer, but they aren't. You can probably guess by now that the opposite is actually true.
Chris Murphy has lied about everything so far. You think this is going to be the first bit of truth, he says? Check the show notes if you're not caught up on your weird audio fisks.
The reality is this: more people with guns and more guns do not make our kids safer. That is an uncomfortable truth. I get it, because we want to believe that we can meet force with potential force and everything will be okay.
Or a total lie, as force is the number one way to resolve such spree shooting events when they happen, and the only reason why they happen is because of gun-free zones.
There were plenty of good guys with guns outside that classroom, some of them steps away from a shooting that was ongoing for an hour, and it did nothing for those kids. Frankly, it made the massacre harder to live with for so many of those parents because it exposed this fraud that told us that we can protect ourselves with more guns.
Stop calling them good. They were cowards who thought about themselves before they thought about the innocent children bleeding out on the other side of that unlocked door.
In Tennessee, after the terrible Covenant School shooting, the state legislature went even further, arming teachers with guns.
So go into the show notes. I have links to heroic teachers like Principal Dawn Hochsprung, the principal of Sandy Hook Elementary, who ran towards the gunfire and lost her life, and Scott Beagle and Aaron Freese, who interfered with the gunman so children could escape in Parkland. You're saying that teachers are willing to use their own bodies as human shields to protect students, but not willing to deploy a 9mm to do the same thing without losing their lives?
Gun crime is down. Urban gun murders have dropped by 12% from 2022 to 2023. Biggest one-year drop in the history of the country. 2024 is on pace for another record-setting drop in urban gun crime.
That's only because of the riots in 2020 and the police being issued stand-down orders to not arrest violent criminals. In fact, our violent crime rates are very low, save for that one-year blip, and gun ownership has never been higher.
By responding to last week's Supreme Court decision and passing legislation to ban the conversion of semi-automatic weapons into machine guns, our kids would be safer, undoubtedly, if it was harder for a deranged psychopath to get their hands on a banned automatic weapon. The majority of Americans are on our side. They want Congress to act, to pass things like universal background checks, to ban bump stocks. They are sick of us learning the wrong lesson every time tragedy strikes. And it's never too late for this time to be different. I yield the floor.
He's talking about the court ruling on bump stocks, which are not machine guns. And bump stocks were only used in one spree killing. And despite Glock switches being on the rise for street killings, they haven't showed up in spree killings. This is pure fear-mongering. As for lessons to learn, they're outlined very clearly in the report, and Senator Murphy addressed none of them because he doesn't care. I don't think he cares about gun laws, because he certainly doesn't seem to care about the rampant street crime in the New Haven area or Norwich or Hartford in his home state. I think he just has an agenda he wants to implement. And like him abusing this report to push gun control, he's willing to use gun control to push his other agendas. And that should concern everybody, especially when you note how wantonly dishonest this speech was. Those are your anti-gun talking points and a few rebuttals to combat them.
So I want to tell you, Weer'd, I gave it a try. I could not get through the Fisk because he made me mad. So I just read your script. So I read all the things you said. I just didn't have to sit through his garbage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will note that that the script for my Fisk doesn't have the bits where I am shouting because, I think I did write some in all caps because I was angry while typing it too because, what a ghoulish prick. And again, go to the show notes. If you're anybody that is curious about school safety and you're like me and you want to gather as much evidence, I've talked a lot about really wanting to see the manifesto from the Covenant school shooter and the bank shooter in Louisville, Kentucky, which are both being suppressed by the police. And I want to read them because I want to see what these people were thinking before they went and did that. Because by knowing what they were thinking, we can come up with some means to either combat them or to deter them. And again, I noted in the Fisk that a lot of them talk about they're concerned about police response times. So they're concerned about how long before more gunfire is going to happen and gunfire in their direction, not coming away from them. And if we can do that, and one of the things we could do is get rid of the Gun-Free School Zone Act because it was never an issue to begin with, and it only became an issue after it was passed. It is clearly absolute garbage law. But also this report is really, really good. I mean, I think it's like 300 pages long. I did not read the entire thing. I certainly read every single one. At the end of every section, there's a series of bulleted points of problems that were observed and potential solutions for those problems. And let me tell you, if you're going to read anything, just scroll down until you see the bulleted points and just read all of those. That's a pretty quick read. But there's a lot of good information in there. And the FBI gets some shade, and maybe willingly so. But in this instance, I mean, they really did a good job on this report. I just wish somebody talked about why the hell the door locks weren't working, because every report and every story that I've heard, it sounds like the teachers did everything perfectly and the school failed them. And this could have been a much, much shorter instance because the killer crashed his truck outside the school. And so everybody saw him coming for a long ways. He was not subtle about his attack. And even set off some pot shots at the funeral home that was across the street with some people that came out to see what was that crashing noise. So the police were en route. And if he had no doors to get through, maybe he would have smashed out a window or something like that. But I don't know. They certainly would have been in a much better situation had he not been able to just walk in past doors that should have been unlocked, or that should have been locked.
So I do want to point out that Utah allows people to carry firearms on public school property if they have permission from school administrators or hold a concealed firearm permit. I'm not entirely sure how that interacts with gun-free zone laws, which I thought were national. But the point being is that if you want to be an armed teacher in Utah, you can. And based on my admittedly quick research, there has not been a school shooting in Utah, nor has there been... I can't find anything about, like negligent discharge or a student getting a hold of a teacher's gun or things like that. If I'm wrong, show me it and I will admit my mistake. But so far as I can say right now, Utah seems to be leading the way that you can have armed teachers and everything's going to be okay.
I believe it wasn't in Utah. I'm trying to remember which state it was. And I'm just going to say it just as a caveat is I believe there has been at least one instance where a teacher who didn't think through the eventuality of needing to use the bathroom while being lawfully armed well enough and did have like a negligent discharge in a bathroom. I think there's been like a couple where some of them may have been school resource officers. I know there's been a few instances where there have been negligent discharges in bathrooms in schools. But as far as how does that work with the Gun-Free School Zone Act, yes, it's a federal law. But much like how marijuana laws are almost never enforced by the DEA unless it's big-time dealers, it's not like the FBI or the ATF are coming in and arresting teachers who are carrying with the permission of their schools. Pretty much people that are unlawfully carrying in school grounds generally get picked up by local police, not by the feds.
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron, do you know who we hope also won't get picked up by the feds?
Our listeners.
Our listeners. But if you're listening to the show, you're probably on a watch list. But we do want to thank each and every one of you. Thank you so much to listening to the show. We really appreciate that. But we got to give a special thanks to our supporters on Patreon. Become a Patreon patron. Go to patreon.com/Assorted Calibers podcast to sign up. We have our early release of the podcast. Plus, we have bonus content like the hilarious blooper reels, the ACB film tracks, the ACB mag dump. And Aaron, is there going to be a new Speaking of Shogun coming out soon?
I don't think you want me to answer that.
For certain values of soon.
Okay, if you're going to require an answer of me. As I don't think I've said here on this show, but I've been dealing with a lot of depression over the past 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And Weer'd, you are the only person I know who has watched Speaking of Shogun. And so it takes me a lot of time to do research and watch it and do my commentary and edit it and upload it. And if people aren't going to try it, then, I can find better use for the time. So, at least the way I'm feeling right now, I'm feeling like there's no point. I'm feeling like there's no point in a lot of things that I do, which is why I haven't been doing them. So, I don't know if there's going to be another Speaking of Shogun right now. I'm just trying to make it day to day. More than you... Probably that's more than you wanted. I know it's super heavy, but you asked.
I'm glad you shared it with us, Aaron, and I will just also say to all of our listeners, it's not just me being the usual Muppet. No, I really enjoy the Speaking of Shogun episodes. So at the $4 or higher Patreon level, you can get access to both of those episodes. Plus, that's the level that'll get you the blooper reels and the ACB film track. Costs you an extra $1 a month to get the ACB thing.
There are 3 episodes.
Oh, yes.
Not 2. Okay. Right, it's my turn now. Remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends, both online and off.
I've got a blog. It's called WeerdWorld.com. That's WEERD World.com. And hear me weekly on Handgun Radio on the Firearms Radio Network.
And you can get more from me if I find the will and the desire to make anything. I already hate how this sounds. At Linktree/Aaron Paulette, that's linkter.e. I know Weer'd will chime in. /Aaron Paulette, all one word.
And thanks to Nate Spencer for our lovely music.
He's manic. I'm depressive. Our psychology is assorted, and so's our podcast. Good night, I guess.
Good night, everybody.